Morning.
Okay.
Good morning.
Now, Jenny, would you tell us the status of the Deborah Chapel, and if any members of an audience are also on the meeting?
Yes, good morning, everybody. We do have a quorum of State Review Board members, and we have several guests with us today. So we have consultants and owner representatives for the nominations, and we have several guests for the Deborah Chapel. I think we can go through names when we get to each agenda item. Does that work, Jared?
Sure. I'm thinking that perhaps we should take the Deborah Chapel consideration first, in order, as a courtesy to the members of the audience who come for that purpose. Does anybody object to that?
No.
Okay. Nope. So
I think everybody's here, but the only thing is I did say 10:15 for that because I thought we would do the other items first.
Oh, all right. And is that working out? I mean, are they going to be calling in around then?
Several people are on, but I'm not sure who else will be joining.
Okay. If you're expecting some additional members in the audience, then I think as a courtesy, we owe it to them, perhaps to wait till 10:15 to do that.
Okay. Well, let me go through who's here. And first, can I just go over meeting procedures?
Oh, please. Yes.
Okay. Good morning. So I just wanted to remind everybody that since we're doing this digitally this morning, and I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. I'm Jen Schofield from the State Historic Preservation Office. Since we are having the meeting digitally, the meeting will be recorded and it will be posted online to enhance public access. If you could please keep yourself on mute until you're speaking, that would be very helpful. And anytime you speak, please just say your name and affiliation for the record, and also for the folks who are calling in and cannot see you. We will be taking a roll call vote for each item from the State Review Board. And there will be opportunity for public comment for each agenda item. And Jared Edwards, who's the chair, is on, and he will call for that. So Jared, we have Matthew Hoberman. Is that correct, Matthew? He's representing. Would you like to introduce? Let me just ask whoever's here to speak
Matthew,
for Deborah Chapel. Just introduce yourself.
My name is Matthew Hoberman. I'm here to represent Congregation Beth Israel, the owner of the property at 151 Ward Street, which looks like is item B on the agenda.
Thank you.
My name is Sandra Berenstein. I chair the cemetery committee where the Deborah Chapel or the building is located, and I'm president of Congregation Beth Israel.
Are there additional guests?
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Rose. I'm the director of the Jewish Historical Society, and I'm just here to learn more about the Deborah Chapel.
Okay.
This is Heidi Heller. I'm the current owner and steward of the Dr. Henry M. Knight House, which is up for consideration of nominations to the National Register.
All right. So we have 4 guests, and welcome to you.
Excuse me, Jared. I'm sorry. Mary Falvey is here from Hartford Preservation Alliance for the Deborah Chapel, and also the National Register nomination for Hartford Special Machinery Complex.
Excellent. And welcome, Mary. All right, so why don't I call the meeting to order? And Jenny has reviewed her comments for us. And I just want to remind everybody that we are obliged to notify our guests of the general procedures for our State Historic Preservation Board meetings, which is a one-page document that I believe has been made available by Jenny to all of our audience guests for their interest. Unless there are any comments, I would like to ask for a motion to approve the June 18 meeting minutes that were distributed. I need a motion and a second.
This is Chris. Okay, Chris Wiegren, I'll second.
Okay. So, are there review board comments for the and/or additions and corrections to the minutes? I guess hearing none, I'll just ask that we have our roll call vote, Jenny.
Okay. Cecilia Bucky?
I have to abstain. I did not print out the minutes and I don't have them in front of me. I'm sorry.
Okay. Stephanie?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes, sorry, my mute button was being stubborn.
I see you there. Thank you. Cece?
Yes.
And Chris?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I get to vote too, Jenny.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. John?
Yes.
Okay, so that is excellent. Thank you very much for that. Now let's turn to the action items, and shall we begin with the Hartford Special Machinery Complex? So let's proceed with that. All right, Jenny. So I need a motion, to review the Hartford Special Machinery Complex draft nomination.
I so move. Cece?
Cece, good. And we need a second?
This is Mark.
John
I
second.
It's a three-way tie. I heard Mark first.
We're fighting over it now. That's fun.
We can have 3 seconders. That's excellent. Okay, Jenny, staff recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Staff recommends the Hartford Special Machinery Complex in Hartford, eligible for listing on the National Register. This is a connected industrial complex that dates from 1915 to 1942, includes the guardhouse from 1942, and also the Stanley P. Rockwell factory, which is across the street at 296 Homestead and is related. It's recommended under criterion A for industry. This project revealed an interesting sort of niche market in Hartford in the 20th century, where Hartford Special Machinery offered some support services, and Stanley P. Rockwell were offering support services that helped other industries. So Hartford Special Machinery was doing specialized design development of machines, production of machinery, and also design of machine tools and parts, and had quite a lot of flexibility to shift their production to supply things for the other industries. And then Stanley Rockwell Company was a heat treating and metallurgical analysis specialist. and they are in a building that was on land Hartford Special Machinery owned for expansion, and Hartford Special Machinery actually had their building constructed for them because of the relationship that the two companies had. So the owner of the property initiated the nomination. Notice of the meeting was sent to owners of both parcels, the Hartford Special Machinery and Stanley Rockwell, and also to the city of Hartford. The CLG response is in process, and we have, I believe, member of the city's planning department online with us this morning. The notice was also sent to Hartford Preservation Alliance 30 days before the meeting, and the nomination has been posted on our website during that time. We have Roisin Youngkin and Kim Smith from McCrosty Historic Advisors representing the nomination. I think we also have some members from Krosky Architects and possibly Winston DeBeetham, who's one of the owners.
Excellent. Now let's see, have there been any letters received?
No, there are no letters received in response.
Okay, and therefore no advertisement or information meeting data?
No, there's no information meeting because there are only 3 entities for the ownership. And they were involved in the nomination process.
All right, and so the criteria that we're considering are?
It's criterion A for industry at the local level.
Okay. Would anybody in the audience like to comment on this proposed nomination? All right. Now
Jared,
I guess.
Jared, this is Cecilia. I'm wondering if someone from the city might have a comment.
Well, I believe they're present. Are they on the call?
Good morning, Aaron Borngraber, Senior Planner for the City of Hartford.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Yes. So the letters, CLG support letters are in progress, and the commission did recommend nomination for the Hartford Special Machinery Complex on the August meeting. Thank you.
Okay.
And that includes Rockwell as well, yes.
That is correct.
Good. Any further comment? If not, any other members of the audience wish to comment on the proposed nomination? Not hearing of them from them. I'll turn to the review board for their comment. So stand in line, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Who wants to start?
Well, I have some comments, but they're of a somewhat more negative nature, so I wasn't, and questioning nature. I'm not sure I want to go first.
Okay.
No one
other comments from the board?
Well, then I guess I'll go. All right, this is Cecilia. I found this fascinating, but I also had questions. It seems very, there's nothing special to me about the Hartford Specialty Machine Company, other than it is representative of so many other machine builders of the era, going back, of course, to 19th century prowess of Connecticut people, builders, engineers, machinists, in creating these industrial machines. My specialty, of course, is Bridgeport, which claims the lead on this specialty machine building. And so I speak perhaps with a certain bias. But I want to hear from the either the owners or the consultant about what makes this stand out At the very least, I think the nomination needs to be highlighting that, as opposed to putting, I mean, putting it in the middle of a long, well, it almost seems like a grab bag of points. You know, it really needs to highlight the fact that, especially for World War I, for 1915, that there is almost an I don't want to say revolution, but an explosion of specialty machines in order to carry out the scientific management plans that many manufacturers had for wartime equipment. And for that, you needed to have a group of special machinery shops in order to service those main production factories. And that's not really mentioned here, and I'm a little surprised that it isn't. And that would explain then the multitude of different kinds of machinery that this company produced. So that doesn't seem so, you know, haphazard. That in fact it was part of an industrial progression that really has its apex at around 1915. There's not one mention of scientific management or Taylorism, and so I would encourage the nominators to redo their essay so that it highlighted that, and therefore this company is an exemplar of that. Not necessarily the best exemplar, but I'm willing to go along with the nomination as long as the special nature of the industry at the time is highlighted. I like the fact that it's still a very intact complex, and I suggest that it does need to be preserved.
Okay. Additional comments, review board members?
I think it's an interesting case of an industry sort of spinning off, a company spinning off or supporting the development of a separate company that would serve them and interact in a sort of interconnected way with them. That's something that we saw until yesterday on River Street in New Haven, where the Bigelow Boiler factory has just been demolished.
Oh no!
There's one building that will remain, but yeah, we can talk about that later.
Okay.
Other comments? I have a couple of observations, and one of them is that the description of the architecture obviously needs to be in this nomination, but I feel that I almost got worn out by the references used again and again and again for the same building type or the same fenestration, and I'm just wondering if that couldn't be tightened up and simply refer to a more lean and less verbose narrative. The architecture is very important as industrial architecture, but how many times do you have to point out each colonial revival door frame? And I find that just a little bit too much. The other thing that I find interesting is, and I know nothing about the history of the property, but if I'm not mistaken, when the reference is made in the nomination to the home of the Reverend Francis Goodwin being on the other side of the tracks, the reason his house was there is that all that land all the way out to the University of Hartford belonged to his grandfather, Junius Spencer Morgan, and it was inherited by Francis Goodwin's mother, who had a very large house built at the other end of Woodland Street there on the corner of Asylum and Woodland. And I think it rather fascinating that the Reverend Francis, who was such an aesthete and generous supporter of art and architecture in Connecticut, lived on the other side of the railroad track. So maybe that has little to do with this, but the old man Goodwin had died, and perhaps Francis decided to sell the land to a industrial complex. I think all of that might be of interest historically. So those are my two comments. Other comments? John Erzan, you have nothing to say.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I think we should call for a vote.
No, wait a minute, Jared. I was
Yes,
on
sir.
mute. I'm sorry. May
Oh.
I say one thing?
Sure, do.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Anyway, I was absorbing all the other comments because they were fascinating, and I have to say I'm on the positive side of this nomination. I thought it was incredibly well researched and very, very professionally written in many respects. It was very polished, is what I'm trying to say, in many respects. It doesn't negate from any of the other concerns that my colleagues have had, but I just wanted to go on record as expressing my appreciation for the thorough level of research that the consultant team did on the history of the industry itself. So that's all I have to say.
Well, that's excellent. Other comments?
Jared, the
Casey?
consultants are on. I don't know, Roizen, if you wanted to add anything.
Well, would they like to comment on what they've heard?
When they're able to come off mute, I believe that they will.
I'm sorry, I was trying to find my mouse to get the mute button. I am, my name is Roizen Yunkin. I was part of the consultant team from across the historic advisors that put together the nomination. So thank you for your comments. I have written them down and can work with Jenny to address the issues that you've raised. This was a really interesting project for us because this is a really intact complex, and especially if you are considering the area in which it's located, there's been a lot of loss in that area, industrial loss. So where each one of these complexes individually may not seem particularly architecturally special, the loss of others almost elevates, I think, their integrity level. And the retention of Stanley Rockwell across the street that had such an intimate connection with Hartford Special Machinery is, I think, especially boosts the significance here. It was also a very long serving special machinery business. It lasted longer than several of the others that were in the city. And as Jenny pointed out, it did it really did support major industry, even though individually making components may not seem as significant as the actual machines themselves. So I can work to reframe the conversation around that significance based on the first comment about scientific management. Other than that, is that just something that, Jenny, that you and I can work on together? how do we move forward?
Yes, we can address all state review board comments before it's submitted to the Park Service. We don't have to come back to the board if they vote in favor.
I see.
Excellent. Review board members, do you have any comments on the consultant's comment? If not, I think it's appropriate for us to consider taking a vote.
Dr. Bucky is trying to come off mute.
Okay, Cece.
I was just prepared to say yes.
Okay.
I anticipated the vote.
Oh.
Okay. So I saw your icon flashing.
Oh.
Tells me.
Does it? Oh, I didn't understand that.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jared.
Okay, so let's have a vote. All those in favor? We have to do a roll call.
Oh, right.
Roll call here. Jenny's going to do a roll call.
Yeah. Cecilia?
Aye.
Stephanie?
Aye.
Jared?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
John?
Yes, and I assume that the recommendations will be incorporated into the report prior to submission.
Yes. Mark?
Yes.
Cece?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Okay, so we have no opposed and no abstentions, so it is unanimously carried. Thank you all. An excellent effort. We appreciate all of the information and in the style and quality of what has been done. So thank you very much. Now how are we doing time-wise? Do we want to deal with the Night House now? Jenny?
We can. It's 10 o'clock.
Okay, so let's move up to the second item for consideration today, which is the Dr. Henry M. Knight House nomination.
Okay.
Okay, and I need a motion to discuss this.
I so move.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Excellent.
Second,
So,
Ken.
Jenny, please, we need staff recommendations.
Thank you. So this is a house that was built in 1853 and updated around 1890. Property also includes a 1910 outbuilding and hitching posts that are counted resources. This is actually a property with complicated layers of history. Heidi Holler is the author of the nomination and the owner and has worked through a lot of that with me. So it is recommended at the state level under criterion A, B, and C. I'm going to address criterion B first. This was the home of Dr. Henry M. Knight, who founded an institution for intellectually and developmentally disabled children. And he founded it in this home after it failed to get through in the state. So he founded his own institution after seeing the need in this property, in this house, boarded children there, and then constructed the school on the neighboring property. And the school is not extant. The building is gone. So it's recommended at the state level under criterion B for social history and health medicine. There are additional layers to the social history, which we're recognizing under criterion A for not just the first Dr. Knight, but other members of the household as well. represents a very interesting juxtaposition between sort of being progressive in terms of social norms, and inventive and progressive and breaking with the mold, and also upholding social norms. James Mars's sister, Charlotte Mars, lived in this house as a domestic servant, as a free person. And we've trying to recognize that history here. And also Dr. Knight's son, George H. Knight, also lived in the house and was engaged in similar field of study, but had somewhat more controversial role in his idea of appropriate treatment for the mentally disabled. And lastly, in terms of architecture, it's recommended eligible. It's really interesting. The first Dr. Knight's wife, Kate Brannon Knight, was involved with Connecticut exhibitions at the World's Fairs. And at about the same date, update to the house was done in the stick style, and it really shows sort of bringing the ideas of the World Fairs back and expressing them in this rural community. The period of significance is 1853, when the house was built, through 1913, which is the date that the Connecticut School for Imbeciles was transferred to state ownership. And I just want to make a note, the terminology used throughout the nomination in reference to disabled people is the terminology of the time period. So the actual names of the schools and terminology used at the time, but it is the definition is explained in the footnotes for each of those terms. So I want to point that out. So the owner initiated the nomination to recognize the history and be a good steward of the property. Notice, of course, was sent to the owner, the first selectman, town historian, and HDC 30 days before the meeting. It was also posted on our website during that time. And we have a CLG response in favor from this first selectman, and the rest of the responses in process. And again, Heidi Holler is online with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. I think, Heidi, if you have some comment to say, this is a moment that we would appreciate it. You've done a really quite thorough job in all of this, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just one point of clarification. The lady of the house who was involved in the Chicago and St. Louis World Fairs, she was the wife of Dr. George Knight, who was the second Knight. Right. So just a minor clarification there. Let me just say we are really excited to present this house to you for nomination to the National Register. My husband and I love history, and we also wanted to protect a house, and we moved to this area specifically because we found out that the house was formerly known as the Connecticut School for Imbeciles and had substantial history and was not on a historic register. And for the past 2 years, I've been doing research on the family and items in the house, and have worked with Jenny over the last several months to pull together this this application. I do appreciate the depth and experience of this state review board, and I would appreciate any and all comments that you have on our nomination.
Well, thank you very much, Heidi. That's much appreciated. Review board, let's see, we should identify, well, the criteria are A, B, and C as described by Jenny. No letters necessary or information meetings, etc. So, ladies and gentlemen of the review board, comments, please.
Heidi, this is Cece Saunders. Do you have any sketches, historic photographs, of the house before it was transformed into the stick style? Because I was having trouble seeing anything prior to the stick style.
Good question, Cece. I have just the one historic photo from the Salisbury Association. And the only photo I have is the one that I included. I have been able to find 2 separate photos of the house included in historic books. However, they are not full photos of the front that have allowed me to ascertain whether it was before or after the stick style. The house is mostly shrouded by trees in those historic sketches in those books. They're not photographs, they are sketches. But there was nothing that allowed me to see what the style of the house was prior to its conversion to a stick style home.
Thank you.
Hi, this is John Herzan. I have a couple of comments that I'd like to offer. First of all, I thought the description of the interior was very thorough, but I had a little bit of a hard time wandering around the house with your words. And I thought it would be really important for clarification to add a floor plan of both floors so that the narrative would be easier to follow. That's all. I think a floor plan would really be helpful. And my second comment is, I think you need a summary paragraph under criterion C for architecture, which summarizes the significance of the house. Hello?
Yep, you're okay.
Anyway, okay. More concisely than what you've done. You sort of launch into the reasons you think it's significant. There's no discussion of the stick style as a period and putting this house into context. And I think that's really something we look for in architectural significance, because the general reader may not know what is going on. We need some context for this house's existence in terms of popular Victorian styles, and it's not there. And I think that it's, if you look at the pictures of the architecture, there's a lot of emphasis on plumbing. The bathrooms get, I think, more attention than the public spaces. Could someone put themselves on mute? There's a lot of rustling in the background, which is very distracting. Anyway, so those are my comments, that I think you need a floor plan to help illuminate your very thorough narrative. You need a context for the architectural period of the building and the stick style and what it represented, its popularity. There's obviously Vincent Scully's book on the shingle and stick style is a good reference for that to use. And I think you need more representative photographs of the public spaces in the house to balance the very reasonable images that you choose. But I think you need more. I wanted to see more about the interior of the house, the public spaces than was presented. So, but otherwise, I think it's eligible. I think it's I think we're all very grateful that you want to see this property recognized. It's got an important historical association with it, which is well researched and well written and well discussed. Oh, and finally, one other thing. I think you need a copy editor on this because there's an awful lot of inconsistencies in your references to dates and hyphens and all the things that, need to be consistent in a document, which I can go over with Jenny, but those are minor, but they would add to the professional presence of this and quality of this work, which is otherwise very, very good.
Thank
That's
you.
all.
Thank you. I'll work with Jenny on those points. I appreciate it.
Heidi, this is Jared Edwards, and I've just a couple of points that follow up on John's observations. So many houses that were simply constructed, I suppose is how to describe them, wood-framed houses of the 1850s and 60s had a facelift in the 90s. And yes, it was the influence of the stick style, popularity of stick style, as really highlighted by the Palliser brothers in Bridgeport, for example. And there were a number of country villas in rather elaborate contortion, newly built in the later stick style. So that the Mrs. George Knight was obviously looking at what the other, I would say, flatlanders that had been buying land in Litchfield and Salisbury and in the Northwest. And so she's being she's following the fashions of the day. So the Scully work is more on the individual buildings that begin with the aesthetic movement in the United States and inspired the more populist type of stick style which this house represents. So I think John's onto it, but I think it has to be recognized as a more fashionable architecture in the 90s and less cerebral as it occurred in the late 70s or even as early as the 60s in England. So there's that, I think, that is important to include. And I think the other item here, too, when you do make so many references to the Chicago World's Fair, there is certainly no aesthetic architecture of any kind, stick style or not. At the World's Fair, it was all about a classical revival, and there isn't a Corinthian or a Doric column, for that matter, in the Knight House. And I think that you've put your finger on it. She obviously conceivably bought a set of classical tiles to put around a fireplace as ornament, and that certainly would have been inspired by the World's Fair. But I think architecturally, she wasn't shopping in Chicago. So I think something like that might be something for you to think about as you are making a few revisions in this. That's it.
Yeah, this is Chris Wiegren. First of all, I thought the mental health aspect of this nomination was absolutely fascinating, and you know, just picking up on the fact that terms that I've grown up thinking of as terms of abuse and derogatory comments had an actual scientific definition was something that was really very helpful to me. I had one question connected with that. You talk about the Mansfield Training School in Hamden, and I know there was a Mansfield Training School in Mansfield.
Yeah.
Is that the same institution that moved to Mansfield coincidentally with?
Yes.
But it was already named Mansfield, or is Mansfield the name that it took once it moved from Hamden to Mansfield?
Mansfield is the name that it took after it was merged with another school and located there. Now, incidentally, there is a night hospital at that Mansfield campus, and that was named in honor of the two Dr. Knights who had already passed away.
Yeah. And just also just the fact that, you know, that well-intentioned people could have very different approaches towards treatment. That one attitude being incorporate people into society, and the other one being protect them, close them away. For the architecture, yeah, and similarly, I think a lot of the big word really is context. What else is going on? You talk about the use of the stick style being rare in this area of the state. So what were people who were building big houses? What were they building? Just briefly, mention some of that, or if there were other examples. You seem to be suggesting that the remodeling is based on the experience with the World's Fairs, but it also seems to come before the World Fairs, around 1890, and then you've got 1893 and 1894. So that doesn't quite work. And then the influences. It's one thing to say this thing existed and this thing resembles it, but to prove that it's an influence, that she's looking at this particular book or she's looking at what she sees at the fair is a little more difficult without real documentation or real direct equivalent visual. So it might be, you might want to tone that down a bit, instead of saying that something's copying such and such a book, say it resembles such and such a book. And the technology is very interesting too. I'd want to see if there's a way to determine that these objects really were in the house, in that historically, because they can be moved in and out. But that's another aspect of architectural history in this period is working to incorporate these new technologies into houses. And if you've got this electric fixture, where's the electricity coming from? If you've got these plumbing fixtures, how are they working the plumbing? That this is something that would be helpful for that, I think. And the idea of context, I think, also would strengthen the section on Fanny Mars. I mean, at the moment, you've got a domestic living in, and she's got some famous relatives, but by itself, that doesn't seem like quite enough to hang a National Register nomination on, to me. First, how in the first place, by the 1850s, if I remember correctly, there were no slaves in Connecticut. Slavery had been abolished gradually, and I think by the 1850s. So to say that she's a free person of color at that point is not really significant. And how many other Black people were there in Salisbury at this time? What did they do? Were they mostly domestics? Were they mostly independent small farmers? Were they working in factories? What do we learn about Black life in Salisbury from this person? So those are, I think, my main comments. I've got some copy edits that I can send to Jenny. Thanks.
Okay.
Hi, this is Cecilia. I just followed up very briefly. Is this the same James Mars that is well established in the Connecticut history record as a runaway slave, or a documented slave experience?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, that would actually be. There are a couple of secondary works, and also his memoir, I think, that could be included if you wanted to go down that particular path. I wanted to echo what Chris was talking about in terms of the history of eugenics and the history of care for mentally disabled persons. And there are a couple really very popular books that have just been printed in the last couple years. One is Adam Cohen's Imbeciles, the Supreme Court American Eugenics and the Sterilization of Carrie Buck, that should be included. And there are some older social histories of the growth of asylums that kind of predate this era, but were certainly very relevant. And what is that? Well, I think it's Rothman's discovery of the asylum is just a key work early on. That really is about the origins of asylums and not their later permutations. And Cohen's book goes into how it comes to the Supreme Court in the 1920s. But it has an interesting early history of eugenics and placing, which, and I didn't look up Knight in the index, but that would place the Knight story in a well-established and fascinating social history of this nature, and would then make that whole 2 pages, page 15, 16 in section 8, come alive, as opposed to looking weird. Not, I don't mean come alive as in be more excitingly written, but rather as placing it clearly. He's not an outlier. He's a representative of the most progressive treatment for these people. And, to have a couple history books in the footnotes would, I think, would help very much. Okay. All in all, I think it's a fascinating example of exactly this, and I didn't know it existed. And it's also a really great house. So I'm all in favor of it, but I think you want to beef up this section.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah, this is Stephanie. Just to follow up on what Cecilia said, I think putting it in understanding what was happening nationally would be helpful, putting this in context and understanding whether the big shift from father to son was something that you were seeing, whether it was more than 2 different approaches. So that's just reiterating, I think, what Cecilia said. The other thing, and this is really more formatting, but if you can, when you're citing photos, cite them in order. It helps to not be jumping around. So start with photo 1 and each one follow. But overall, it's a great nomination and a fabulous house, and it's wonderful that you're preserving it. So,
thank you.
Okay. Any other review?
Can anybody hear? This is Ken. Can anybody hear me?
Ken.
I have a terrible connection.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Fantastic. Listen, I'd like to express a minority opinion here. I understand everything. It's a wonderful nomination. Absolutely deserves to be put on the register. But I really object to the casual use of the terminology imbecile, idiot, feeble-minded. If it's the name of an organization or you're quoting somebody, absolutely. But beginning on page 8, on section 8, page 13, those not citation, not as the name of an organization, but simply used as the terms of the time. But throughout this report, I think if somebody were to submit a report about African Americans, and they used terms that were appropriate back then, Negro, colored people, we would all change that. So in terms of this is written in 2021, and as a 2021 document, either you've got to put those in quotes, and that's not done in every instance from page 8, section 8, page 13, or you have to use the appropriate terminology. And personally, I would rather not see those explanations hidden in footnotes. I would rather see a paragraph on section 8, page 13, before the paragraph that starts in 1855, and say, look, the terms used in the past that we now recognize are naming organizations. Of course, we will use the terms that were used back then. But throughout the rest of this, I don't think it's appropriate to use the term imbecile unless you are quoting somebody.
Yeah, I agree completely, Ken.
And then
Cecilia.
It's also, yeah, I just want to continue a little bit. On section 8, page 15, the third paragraph down. During the late 1800s, mentally disabled individuals placed in care in the United States were frequently children of immigrants or came from generations of poverty and oppression. I know that if you look carefully at that, these people had, these immigrants had. So I think that we have to understand that there were many people being disabled or imbeciles or feeble.
Ken, you just cut out. Do you want to either try again?
So well, then, sure. I don't know how far along I got. This is section 8, page 15, the third round, where it's the mention of many folks being labeled as disabled were the children of immigrants. And the part is that let's just add a sentence of that these folks were not, this was a modern, didn't speak English, or they couldn't answer questions that were very cultural, but of course they have no knowledge of what that's something that's happened until fairly recent times. So I would just like some clarification there that these are not folks who have modern diagnosis of intellectual disability, but these are folks who, because they didn't have or of Western European ancestry, they didn't speak English, it was presumed mentally disabled in life for good reason. That in the last 30 or 40 years as well. So that's something I would just like to see these are folks are not necessarily disabled. I don't know, the son, George, I would actually like to see a little more on him, because this guy supported involuntary sterilization. This guy was testified as you these are things they leave out, but I would like to see emphasized a little bit in this report. This was a bad guy. And remember, the American eugenics movement.
We're not hearing you right now.
In his political philosophy. Have I cut out again?
Yes.
Yes, we're getting the first parts. Ken, do you want to email me?
Well, could I just say that a lot of this
absolutely.
is covered
I'll do
in
that.
Adam Cohen's book, and so if you were to include that social history of the eugenics movement, that would go a long way to solving some of the concerns.
Let me just ask the board.
Fantastic.
We struggled a bit. There are a lot of threads in here we felt necessary to recognize, and we're carefully trying to place them under the proper criteria where an argument could be made. So do you feel if expanding on the eugenics movement fits under social history?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. He
Actually,
is living
Jenny,
in
on
the
that-
house while doing that.
Mm-hmm. I did have a comment. It actually relates to the criterion B, which I applaud Heidi, you doing the research on this historic person, good, bad, and ugly. My one recommendation would be, in my opinion, it tends to be a hard sell when you make a criterion B nomination, with a personal residence, where they were born, where they were died. Is that really important to who they were historically? Where the school was may be an easier sell. So the recommendation, if you have any of this information, might be, we know that Miss Mars lived in the house with the owner of the house and the doctor. We know that some of the children also lived in the house. Is there anything about the house as a document itself that illuminates that relationship? In other words, do you know, was Miss Mars stuck up in the attic, or were the children kind of shoved off in a room, or did they have equal rooms, equal sizes, big windows as the other residents of the house? You may not be able to find that, but if you look at it through that lens, it helps the context of your criterion B. In the absence of a school, you could use the school as a lens for, well, what was the opinion? How was that life or that treatment? Just a suggestion.
Yeah. This was the school initially. So under the first Dr. Knight, he started the school in the house before building the actual school building.
He had up to 14 students in this house with his wife, the servants, and their 2 sons.
Okay, and that, I think, without expanding too broadly on what you've already written, there's some context there. I mean, it wasn't so long prior to that the mentally ill would be stuck in effectively prisons, as opposed to a home. I think that there's some richness there that could help help the context of your nomination, particularly under criterion B.
Yeah, and the layout of the house, particularly the 3rd floor, I think you'd really be able to envision where the students and also where the servant, where they live.
The issue
Absolutely.
is the issue being
And
the
where
house
was the house? Was it? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. The issue being that the house has been significantly remodeled since the period when it housed students.
Inside? No.
Wasn't it? I thought it was expanded and remodeled in the 1890s, and the students were living there in the 1860s.
There was an addition that was added in the back, and then the south side of the house, the porch was enclosed. But those were the modifications.
And the rest of the 1890s remodeling was just decorative?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
And I think even where the house is says something. It's not tucked away in the hills, far away from everyone's sight. It's effectively right on Main Street in Salisbury, correct? And we're not trying to hide these. It's those little details that really say a lot. We're not going to hide these kids off in somewhere where no one will ever see them. They're in a house right on Main Street.
Right. It's in the village of Lakeville and a street that intersects Main Street. So it is a main route, Sharon Road.
It's a small detail, but it actually illuminates a lot of what may have been going on in terms of the views.
This is Cecilia, and as a result, the discovery of the asylum really is a progressive move. That it's taking whether they're children or adults, taking them out of shackles in a basement or out of jails and putting them in hopefully a restorative space. And so, rather than seeing it's just, eugenics is very tricky, but not all. It's hard to state that these are bad people. They're misguided people, but they're trying to do the right thing for these unfortunates.
This is Jared with a detail in that discussion, and it's simply that elaborate Caldwell light fixture that's on the 3rd floor. Surely that was not installed when the 3rd floor was filled with students or members of the clinic. It must have been either just installed there recently, or it may have been moved from a location on the 1st floor where it wasn't wanted any longer. So I think you can't draw conclusions necessarily about that fixture as you imply in some of your comments, because you just don't know. There's no photograph showing what was up there before that fixture. So it really is difficult to assign some significance to it, because it's made by a prominent manufacturer. You could go to a lighting consultant in Chicago, or you could buy it probably in Bridgeport and have it sent to Litchfield to hang in your front hall. But so it's that sort of thing you have to also keep in mind.
I have been in contact with someone who lived in the house from, or her grandmother owned the house from when she was 6 years old to when she was 20 years old. And her great grandmother owned it prior to that. So I'm working with her to get more information on which features of the house are truly original. The chandelier was not located on the third floor. I had found it in a second floor bathroom and moved it to the third floor location myself.
I see. Good. All right, review board, any other discussion? If not, let's have a vote. Okay, review board members are all in favor, say yes. And
I've got to do roll call.
Yep, Jenny's got to do a roll
Cecilia?
call.
Yes.
Stephanie?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
John? John Herzan, are you still on? Okay, we'll come back. Mark?
Yes.
Cece?
Yes.
And Chris. Chris, I see you.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. That's everyone, Jared.
Good. Thank you. We did hear from John, did we?
No. John, are you on? Okay, he may have stepped away. We'll come back later.
Okay. Now let's move on, shall we, to the Deborah Chapel eligibility status review, and have our guests joined us?
Yes.
Yes. We have
So
several
we have
guests.
we have Matt and Sandra and Elizabeth.
And Attorney Scott Lewis.
Scott Lewis. Oh, thank you very much. Okay. Now we have to start at the beginning, which is to ask to have a motion to review this from the review board.
Yeah, this is Chris. I move that the review board go on record as determining that the Deborah Chapel continues to contribute to the significance of the Frog Hollow Historic District.
Okay, and
I will second that. Cecilia?
Thank you. Jenny, staff recommendations?
Thanks. First, I just want to remind everyone that this is not an application to add or remove property from the National Register. That the SHPO is seeking recommendations from the State Review Board about the current integrity and whether or not the property continues to contribute to the National Register district that it's part of. The owners and representatives for the owner were noticed per our policy for these reviews, excuse me. And staff does recommend that it continues to contribute to the district. I'm going to ask Todd to give you a summary of the listing.
Thanks, Jenny. Good morning, everyone. we are seeking guidance from the State Review Board of whether this Deborah Chapel at 151 Ward Street in Hartford continues to contribute to the Frog Hollow Historic District. Frog Hollow Historic District was listed originally in 1979 with boundary increase in 1984. This property is identified as 153 Ward Street, which is the Congressional Beth Israel Cemetery in 1890. The building in question, the actual chapel, according to the assessor's card, was built in 1873, but actually it's been confirmed to have been built in 1886, which is within the period of significance. Frog Hollow District was listed under criteria A in the categories of community planning and industry as an unimpaired demonstration of the development of a 19th century factory-based urban neighborhood, as well as for technological advances produced through the neighborhood's factories. The district is also significant for its architecture under criterion C, including excellent, well-preserved examples of their building types, and Hartford's best architects of the area are represented by several buildings within the district.
Okay. Now, how should we proceed, Jenny?
I think public comment.
Okay, then let's turn to our guests and ask them if they wish to identify themselves and tell us what they want us to know.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm struggling here a little bit. I have a new computer. The volume is not as loud as I need it to be. So if I could ask you if you have any responses or questions to me, that you just speak up.
Do you want to identify yourself first?
I'm sorry, I did not hear that.
Would you like to identify yourself first?
Yes, I will. Sorry about that. My name is Matthew Hoberman. I'm an attorney at Butler, Norris & Gold, and I represent Congregation Beth Israel, the owner of the building at 151 Ward Street.
Thank you.
This building is, as Todd indicated, is located at 151 Ward Street. And to give some context, it's neither historical nor significant. It's simply old. It looks good. It's nice. It's got some architecture from the late 19th century. However, let's look at the context of how it was first admitted to this National Register. It was admitted, I think Todd said in 1978, but I believe the application is dated, I'm sorry, Todd said 1979, but I believe the application is dated 1978. And originally it was not included. Neither were a lot of other religious buildings in the area, but in fact, the entire cemetery is excluded from the original designation of the Frog Hollow Historic District.
Put it on speakerphone.
The context, I believe, of that at the time in 1978, 1979 was our country going through urban redevelopment.
Well, put it on speakerphone.
This was to allow residents in that area to take advantage of historic tax credits so they can redo their houses. This was not at any time to save these structures, because if it were, I think that the building at 151 Ward Street would have been included. It wasn't. Moving down the road to 1989 is when this building and this area was included in that district. Okay. I can only suppose that at the time they were no longer looking at historic tax credits for the area. Why they included it, I do not know. It's an old building, but no notice of this designation was ever sent to the property owner. In fact, the property is still designated as 151 Ward Street. This property, 151 Ward Street, is not listed in the National Register of Historic District Neighborhoods. It still is not listed. Any notice that was sent or that the city claims or that any applicant claims they sent was never received. The city still maintains a mailing address of 153 Ward Street, and I think Todd is familiar enough with the area. 153 Ward Street, as shown on the assessor's records, is simply the cemetery. So if they sent a notice, it would have gone to the cemetery. I don't think anyone there would have read it. if you look at the original application from 1978, which may have been approved in 1979, letters were sent to a roster of all property owners in the district, so they had the opportunity to either accept the designation or not. In 1978, no notice was sent to my client, not simply because the assessor didn't have their address, because it wasn't included as a property in 1978. Okay. So moving forward, I think some of you are aware that this property is subject to litigation, so I do not want to go into too many details. The city is appealing a decision. We know that there are people that are in favor of preserving this building. We know that my client does not want to preserve the building. I will not go into all those details. However, I will summarize some of this information. That this board right now is looking to review the eligibility status. This is an opportunity for you guys to correct what was originally a property that was omitted. The property owner wants to keep it omitted. The property owner was never notified in 1989 that it was to be included in this district. This property owner does not want this building included in the historic district. There's no evidence that's presented at any time up till now that this property has any historic significance. It's an old building. It looks good. I won't deny that. However, there's no evidence that anyone of famous or notoriety ever had a service there for themselves or for anyone else. There's no evidence in the record that anyone of historic or significance ever walked into this building. So now is your time to review the eligibility of this property. I will also inform you that now there is a religious land use institutionalized persons act, otherwise known as ROLUPA, which prohibits government entities from implementing restrictions on a property owner's use of a property when it comes to religious land uses. That's exactly what I think we have here. So you have the opportunity to apply the right law, the right circumstances, the right context at the time, and understanding that if this designation or eligibility is in conflict with my client's rights under Rule UPA, and it does not achieve what it wants to achieve with respect to the city of Hartford, that your involvement in prohibiting my client's constitutional rights to use this property, if they are in violation of Rule UPA, then we will look to this board to be responsible as well as the city. Thank you.
That was a negative. That you can't.
Yeah, that's the thing, guys. They want to
Right.
demolish it. They're claiming religious.
Excuse me, if you're not speaking, could you please stay on mute? The meeting is recorded. We're getting some background noise. Thank you. Okay, Jared, I believe there are others who wish to comment. Go ahead.
Taking myself off mute and testing for sound quality here. My name is Dr. Alyssa Sampson. I am an urban geographer. Among other things, I specialize in the 19th century and Jewish migration. And I would actually aver that if you asked anybody who's a geographer or a historian who specializes in Jewish history or women's history for that matter, that in terms of the Devorah Society and its building, you have something historically quite distinctive here. And that has to do with the nature of women's work, Jewish women's work, and migration. And whether or not the congregation in its current day form found the building to be interesting or significant, may I quote here from the previous Rabbi Avram Feldman, who published a book about the congregation, and in it had actually a section about the value and importance historically of its Devorah Society. So if you hold on 2 seconds, I am now reading from the section called the Ladies Deborah Society, which gives its official records as being founded as a Foreign Verein because these are German-speaking Jewish immigrants in May 1st, 1954, and was, according to the book, and I'm quoting here, the first Jewish women's society in Hartford, probably the first in Connecticut. It began as a sick visiting and sick benefit society. Until recently, the society had also an insurance feature. The members prepared shrouds for the dead. They made layettes for children of the poor. They stayed up with the mourners. They provided clothing for the needy. They were the original caseworkers of the Jewish community of Hartford. They endowed a free bed at St. Francis Hospital and a Devorah room in the Newington Home for Crippled Children. And it goes on about the society's contributions and how they worked in this funeral chapel, which was rather unusual for women to have established, since typically it was men who established burial societies, both in Europe and in the States, in terms of immigrant societies. And it goes on and says, and now we're in 1943, not only were the women extremely important, of course, the Auerbach family and other very important families within Jewish society in Connecticut, it mentions, quote, the Deborah Chapel at the Congregation Cemetery was a gift, in other words, a recent gift when it's noted here in 43, from the Ladies Deborah Society. Until very recently, the society paid all the maintenance costs of the chapel, and they're doing that from the burial fees, and they're taking care of the burials. At the time of the building of the present temple, the society made available a substantial sum to pay for the library that is to be part of the educational facilities of the chapel. The Ladies Deborah Society is not an auxiliary of the congregation Beth Israel, but throughout the years, the society met at the temple and its membership came largely from the synagogue. It has been so closely identified with the life and activities of the congregation that the society belongs in the centennial record of Beth Israel. Now that's the congregation speaking. So I would say that the current stance on the part of the congregation is quite recent, and if they didn't notice that they had become part of a historical district in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, it seems rather odd that they wouldn't read their own literature on the centennial and many, many other archives. And this, by the way, came from the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati, a famous archival repository of American Jewish history, and particularly that of German Jews and their migration. It seems rather odd that others cherish this history, this Jewish woman's history, this Connecticut history, this Hartford civic history, and that the congregation itself, which has now been suburban since the late 30s, has sort of eschewed that history and turned its back on its urban origins. Please feel free to ask me any questions. There are many Jewish historians who are concerned with this move.
I'd like to just follow up about the categorization of Deborah Society, because historically, this has been a society that was an elitist society that only allowed members of daughters and wives who had ancestors that were also members of the temple. So they were exclusionary. They refused to allow new members of the congregation to become members of this society. In fact, they went so far as to institute a blackball procedure. So not only was it an elitist society within this congregation, but it certainly shouldn't be something that is lionized as a great society for women of either the late 19th century and certainly not the current times that we live in. And if we're going to look at new facts and circumstances to be entered into the record, then I believe that is a fact and circumstance that should be under consideration in the eligibility status of this building.
In response to Mr. Hoberman, that happened the exclusionary aspect in which you had to have an ancestor who was the member, a female ancestor, presumably, of the Deborah Society only happened after the synagogue received the gift of the chapel and the money for the library from the Deborah Society. At that point, they had dissolved and became simply a society of those who were the descendants. Before that, they are open in terms of their membership. Again, looking at the historical record is useful in this regard. And the congregation actually has many of these papers, as does an archive within Connecticut's synagogues. The pandemic, of course, impedes access. And if, of course, a synagogue would like to open up those 19th century records, many of us read German, and can help the synagogue in understanding its own history. This is not a move that is understood, broadly speaking, by
I'm
historians.
sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. I don't mean to talk over you.
This is not a move that is understood well on the part of a congregation by those who study German Jewish women's history.
Thank you. I'd just like to point out to the board that nothing in the 1978 application or in the amendment in 1989 indicates anything about Jewish women's history. So this seems to be new facts and circumstances as far as the status of this building. And I don't know if the board has the ability to introduce new facts and circumstances that have not already been in the record, so to speak, when the application was made. But I do appreciate what you're saying, Ms. Sampson.
Excuse me, Jared, are you on? Jared Edwards? Okay, Chris, could you chair until we hear back from Jared?
Certainly, yeah. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this from the public?
Hi, hello, sorry, yes.
Yes.
My name is Marcus Ordonez. I am a resident of Frog Hollow. I wanted to share my thoughts in regards to the discussion on the historical value of the Deborah Chapel. As a resident of the neighborhood, I frequently walk by the cemetery. I have to say that we've done multiple historic tours with the Hartford Preservation to learn more about the cemetery, and we've learned about the history of it, as Ms. Sampson just reviewed with us. That is also information that people within the neighborhood have been aware of, and which is why we care about whether or not this structure stays on the historic list, which I believe it should. It also, in my opinion, goes along with the visual history of Hartford and the historic buildings that we have in the area, specifically Frog Hollow, and how when it was in use, the chapel helped the people within our neighborhood, and we don't want to lose that history. I would also argue that it's not just a good-looking old building. You can see that it does have historical value, and it's actually in relatively good condition considering that it's been abandoned and it has been gated. So I hope that the decision is made to keep it on the historic list because I think it's important to the neighborhood and the history of Hartford that it stays. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else?
I will add, as far as the neighborhood is concerned, my client did approach the neighborhood revitalization zone of Frog Hollow, and they have supported.
Wait, I'm sorry, Calvin, did you say? Someone else is speaking.
I'm sorry, it's hard to hear. Can I just wait then?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Mr.
Okay.
Hoverman, you were saying?
Oh, yes. So as far as the neighborhood of the Frog Hollow is concerned, my client did approach the neighborhood revitalization zone, and they have supported my client's demolition of this property, and that's on record with the application. So I do appreciate Mr. O'Donius's opinion, but that is in conflict with what a local operating board who either can withhold or grant approval for certain actions that take place within that zone. That is how Hartford Planning and Zoning has set it up, and that is how the Hartford Historic Preservation Committee has set it up as well.
I'm sorry, just to follow up. I'm a member of the Frog Hollow NRZ, and you're saying that the NRZ was in favor of demolishing it?
We have a letter that states that there was no objection. And are you speaking on behalf of the NRZ now? I'm confused.
No, I'm strictly a member of the NRZ. I'm
Okay.
not speaking for the entire.
Yeah, there's a letter from the NRZ to my client that was submitted to the Hartford Preservation Commission.
Okay. There was another speaker.
Yes, hi. Can you still hear me? My name
Yes.
is Calvin Parker. Thank you. I'm a resident of Frog Hollow, and I'm not particularly a historian, but I can speak to the value of the building and its presence and the addition that it makes to the neighborhood. It is while conforming in the style of a number of the other architecturally significant buildings in the neighborhood, it is also distinctive in its own particular position, not just because of its location, but because of the uniqueness of the structure. So as a piece of architecture, I happen to believe as a neighborhood resident that it's significant. And I'm interested in the fact that the council for the congregation is dismissive about something that is old and something that is architecturally interesting or significant. Because having had some history of working with historic preservation, I don't think those are two things that should be dismissed. So in terms of the cultural significance of the property, it does seem that regardless of exactly whether the women in Hartford at the time were minding their P's and Q's, the fact that this was an endeavor of women in a synagogue and that they were the ones who were initiating and self-actualizing and doing all of the things that people in the women's movement want to talk about these days, and the fact that they were doing it at that point in history, I think is also culturally significant. So I want to register that. And then the third comment is, it appears to me that the council for the congregation was threatening the board about some sort of forthcoming litigation regarding a statute having to do with whether this rights of the religious organization are going to be impeded by your action. Again, this seems to me to be an unusual stance for the congregation to take. If this matter is going to be litigated, it will be litigated in a court of law by people who were expert in that particular statute. They will work out the difficult issues, if they are difficult, in fact, as to whether there is any sort of provision that would prevent the action that you are considering taking. That to me does not appear to be your charge today. Your charge is simply to determine whether the building remains significant. It is already significant. You would need a special occurrence to demonstrate that the significance it had when it was put on the register has somehow leaked and gone away. Absent that, it seems to me that your charge is to recognize the significance of the building. If and when there is any litigation, that may or may not have the power to overturn your actions, but you should not be cowed in fulfilling your responsibility to determine whether this building is historically significant. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who've not had a chance to speak?
No, but I would like to respond to that. I think the significance that I was discussing would be the standards that this board should be upholding. So we're not just talking about cultural standards, talking about the standards that are put in place by the, I don't even know if it's still the Department of the Interior that regulates these properties. But again, we're talking about whether or not this property is eligible. If we're talking about the eligibility at the time, again, originally when the application was made in 1978, this property was excluded. So if just to address the last speaker, if we're talking about the eligibility in 1989, there is nothing in the application to discuss what those standards are. So my point is that this register is being used by the city of Hartford in order to defend its position. I'm not going to go into the details, but they claim that this property at 151 Ward Street is listed in this national register. I've gone through this national register both from 1978 and the amendments also in 1989. In 1978, it's not listed in the register. In 1989, the property at 151 Ward Street is not listed in the register. So I can appreciate some of the commentary from Ms. Sampson and the last speaker, and also from Mr. Ordonez, who lives in the neighborhood. However, my point is, if you're going to look at the eligibility, now is the time to see what was done in the past in 1978, why it was omitted, and why it's not listed in the register currently. And some of these issues, I believe my client would be happy to discuss with Mr. Ordonez and Ms. Sampson. However, it is subject to litigation, so our hands are tied. In addition, my client is being limited in exercising its constitutional rights and what it wants to do to this property, simply because this board, the state register, is looking at this and saying it's listed on here. And that authority or that response that you guys are going to give as far as the current eligibility has impacts. And so my point also is not to threaten you with the suit, but for you to understand that now, when determining the eligibility, Rule UPA comes into play. It was not in play in 1978 or 79. However, I believe that this property was omitted because it was associated with the religious use. And there are other properties that were specifically excluded. And my understanding is because this original register was compiled from all the properties in this district, as Hartford did in 4 or 5 other districts, simply to allow those homeowners at the time to capture historic preservation tax credits. And we all know, and I think we're all familiar with from our high school, that there's a separation of church and state. And so it's my understanding at the time when they were going to offer federally funded tax credits, they did not want to offer those to religious use organizations. Now you're dealing with the religious use, and there is a RLUIPA statute in play. And I feel that it is my duty to bring that to light when you're looking at the eligibility today, and that you don't promulgate any mistakes that have been made in the past. Thank you.
This is Jenny Schofield. I'm the National Register Coordinator. I will just clarify that the property was included in the listing. It's mentioned as part of the cemetery, and at the time of the listing, you wouldn't necessarily enumerate each monument that is located within the cemetery. It is signed by the National Park Service in 1989, as they recognized they did not itemize certain properties, and so they corrected that in 1989. There would have been noticing associated with that. And just in terms of religious properties, in the National Register guidance and bulletins, you are allowed to list properties on the National Register of Historic Places for other reasons besides religion, such as architecture or its integration into as part of the neighborhood, or for social history. The way that the National Park Service designed the program, it is an honorary recognition program meant to encourage stewardship. So layers of local legislation laid on top is city matter, is not part of the the Park Service's National Register program. So I hope that.
Thank you, Jenny, I'm sorry. I know in the past you have told me that it's listed on the register, but when I look at the page submitted in March 21, 1989, 151 Ward Street is not listed there. 153 Ward Street is. And there are separate assessed parcels, and also the Zion Hill Cemetery is. But again, the Hartford assessor has this shown as 151 Ward Street. And so while you may determine that it's listed, I think it's fair for the remainder of the members on the board to look past an administrative decision and come to that conclusion on their own, because the sheet that I'm looking at, I would disagree with your conclusion that it's listed. And I don't want to diminish your opinion, but I think it's fair for the other board members on this committee they have the ability to make that decision themselves.
I believe that it's not our power to determine what is and isn't listed on the National Register. That's done by the National Park Service. We're just here to determine whether or not the building still has historic and architectural integrity.
Well, again, that's fair. That's fair, Mr. Wiggin. But again, it's a simple determination. Is it there or not? I mean, you can pawn that obligation off on the National Park Service, but you have the application in front of you, and it's not. I don't see the address 151 Ward Street, and so if you're telling me that the National Park Service has 151 Ward Street listed in here, I would like to see it. I have the opportunity now to bring this information to your attention, because I think in the past it's been overlooked. I think that in 1989, there was no notice that this property that we're talking about, 151, was going to be included, or that the property owners were ever notified of that. So I do understand where you're coming from. I am just trying to prevent, again, a mistake that I believe was made in the past, and that now you have the opportunity to look at what's in the record and this testimony to understand where this property currently is situated. And I also believe that the state historic property register mirrors exactly what's in the National Register. So again, I believe it's just a promulgation of this past mistake. And while it's had very little significance in the past, whether it was listed or not, now it has it. Now it is important. And so now I think it rests with you to make the right decision. And I'm asking you to look at the application and make a correct decision.
If I may jump in again, it was earlier, in terms of clarification, earlier was mentioned that there was a letter from the Frog Hollow NRZ, and we now have the president of the NRZ on the call, Mr. Aaron Gill. Aaron, if you'd like to say something.
Good morning, all. And just for clarification, I'm the chair of the Frog Hollow NRZ, Aaron Gill. And it sounds as if perhaps our current thoughts and feelings in the Deborah Chapel may have been misunderstood or misrepresented this morning. So I just want to clarify that we did most recently in May of this year offer a letter of support of preservation of this beautiful structure. Obviously, I think as most of us are aware, the structure provides just an incredible asset to the neighborhood, and is something that can be even more valuable with some love, with the love and the TLC that it needs. So I'm happy to, I guess, answer any questions on the stance or in regards to the thoughts of the NRZ, but did want to just take a second to note that the Frog Hollow NRZ fully supports the preservation of the Deborah Chapel.
Thank you. So is anyone else from the public who would like to speak? Okay, then we'll close the public comment. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Sampson. Yes.
Dr. Sampson, yes.
Excuse me.
I just want to add I have no problem obtaining letters from other historians and geographers of German Jewish history in America to amplify my comments. If that's what you would like, that is my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right.
If I may.
Yes, yes. Please identify yourself. And yeah.
Hi, yes, my name is Rody Genie. I'm also a resident of Frog Hollow and also a member of the NRZ. And I am actually joining this a little late. I was thinking I was going to be able to join today because of conflict. But want to obviously throw my support as well towards preservation of the chapel. It's a beautiful structure. The community has really galvanized around saving structures like this. And, it's especially during COVID, to see how many people that have come out to get involved specifically around the cemetery and are raising their awareness of this issue with the Deborah Chapel. I think similar to Dr. Sampson, I think it was, we are happy to present, other examples of folks within the community that would be willing to demonstrate that they also believe that this should be preserved. And once again, I can elaborate on the other pieces of this, but I think Dr. Sampson has gone through the historic significance of this, and really we don't want to lose any more history in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any more members of the public who have not had a chance to speak? Anyone else? Okay, then I'm going to close the public discussion, and the board, members of the review board can discuss this matter. Anybody have anything to say?
If I may, this is Cecilia speaking as a social historian and a historian of immigration and ethnicity. I welcome Dr. Sampson's commentary here on a piece that of history that I was not too aware of. So I do think that his social history as well as the building itself is significant, as is the cemetery as an important early urban display of an immigrant community building an institution, and it's become so integral to the neighborhood. My big question is, well, who's going to take care of the cemetery? It sounds like the owners of the cemetery are actually abandoning it. I would like some clarification about that.
Okay.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
Yeah, no, there is no to allay your fears, we are not abandoning the cemetery. It's simply a building that we are talking about. The cemetery is still there. It's still under the synagogue's control. It has no intention of abandoning the cemetery. If you want, we can talk offline, because the committee chair of the cemetery committee has much more history, more modern history about the challenges that there have been for this, as some people have called, suburban synagogue to manage the urban cemetery. There are adjacent cemeteries that are run by other organizations that have come under. Some of those cemeteries have been derelict, and other members of the community have stepped up to maintain those adjacent cemeteries. I think my client was approached at one point, but again, we could talk offline whether or not they wanted to join it. Currently though, to answer your question, they're not abandoning the cemeteries. In fact, there may be an opportunity if the building is demolished to utilize that space for additional plots in order to keep a better connection to the neighborhood and the historical roots of that cemetery and this congregation. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Let's see. Oh, well, we really closed the public speaking, but Dr. Sampson?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk again. In all seriousness, generally speaking, there is a problem in terms of cemetery maintenance, cleanliness, particularly when cemeteries are no longer proximate to their congregations. In this case, it's an urban area surrounded by other cemeteries and green space. And I do know that the Friends of Zion Hill Cemetery have been busy doing cleanups and inviting others to do cleanups. That is a sign to me that cleanups are something that the congregation may or may not be involved in and should be involved in as part of maintenance.
Again, if you're gonna give Dr. Sampson the opportunity to talk after the public hearing is closed, I do want to address that.
You're going to get the opportunity to talk after the public hearing was closed.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Mr. Wigan.
Yeah.
I can't hear you. So the Friends of Zion Hill is not associated with the synagogue, but the building itself is preventing adequate monitoring of this cemetery. The location of the cemetery is across the street from a police substation. The building inhibits efficient monitoring of the cemetery to prohibit vandals from getting in through the fences. And if the building were not there, it would be easier to keep the cemetery clean. Okay, and I didn't want to bring that information because I know the public comments have ended, but if you make an exception, you need to give me an opportunity, I believe, too. Thank you.
All right, review board. Anybody else from the review board want to say anything? Are you ready to vote? Yeah. I mean, I'll just observe again that we've been asked to determine whether or not the building has historic and architectural integrity to contribute to the district. If it is determined by the Park Service that the building is not properly listed in the district, that's another matter, but that's not what our charge to determine. So I guess we're ready to vote then. Jenny, would you call the roll, please?
Sure. Cecilia?
Yes, it's architecturally significant.
Stephanie?
Yes.
Jared?
Still not on.
Okay, I think he's lost his sound. Ken? Ken Fetter? Okay. John? John was just trying to call, so I'm not sure if people are getting dropped. Mark?
Yes, still significant.
TC? TC Saunders? Okay, Chris?
Yes.
Okay, so we have 4, and I have one board member calling. Should we give a minute for people to call back in?
Yeah, Jenny, it looks like most of everyone that's calling in from a phone, we have a lot of phone numbers this month. So perhaps if those who are having trouble speaking could hang up and call back in, that might undo the mute because we can't unmute you. You have to unmute yourselves.
Okay.
To
to unmute, people should press star 6.
Thank you. All right, give me one moment. I'm going to call John and see what the issue is for him. Okay. It seems that some of the calls were dropped, so one board member is calling back in now. I apologize for the wait.
John, is that you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, we sure can.
Great.
John, we lost you for a while, but we were voting.
Yes. And is it too late to make a comment? I got dropped by accident.
I guess not. Everyone else has voted, but
I vote to support its continuing status as a contributing building as well.
okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. I didn't really mean to cut you off, John, if you're explaining your vote or. Yeah.
No, I just want to make sure my vote was registered.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to vote for the preceding nomination for the Knight House as well, and I'd like that to go into the record as well.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to point out was that my understanding with the register and the Park Service is that if there are any issues about identification in the inventory of the nomination, what really trumps that is the boundary line and the map. That anything within the boundary is listed on the National Register, even if an error was made in the numbering of the resource or the addressing of the resource. And this is a really important point because technical corrections can be made for errors in that regard, but what really counts is whether the resource is within the mapped boundary as it has been submitted to the National Park Service.
Along those lines, the only legal description that was submitted excludes this property. So thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. When in 1989, when these other properties were listed, the legal description was not updated to include this cemetery.
But the map, if the map for the district that was submitted to the Park Service includes the cemetery, it's a listed resource.
Right, I understand. And if you look at the map and the running legal description for the map, the cemetery is specifically excluded around Ward Street. Thank you.
Okay. We've finished with that matter then. Other discussion?
We're in the voting phase, right?
No, we've completed the voting phase.
Okay, all right. And so
We've voted for agenda item
Yes.
4B1.
Yes.
Okay, so that's done.
That's done. So yeah, this is a item Roman numeral V5 discussion. I don't know is there anything to discuss? New business staff report. We can merge that all together. As I mentioned earlier, the most of the Bigelow boiler factory in New Haven was demolished yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It was declared unsafe. There's some question because it's a city property, and who does the city send the unsafe notice to? And interestingly, and at the same time, the city had an RFP out for stabilization work. But the building official decided that it was unsafe and moved in and demolished it. There's one section that remains, but the rest of it's gone, and that's really sort of the heart of around which a National Register district was built.
So Chris, was it part of a National Register district then?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was an industrial district along River Street.
That's what that's what
Bigelow Boiler and most of several other industries, many of which were sort of spin-offs or coordinated, suppliers to Bigelow.
Yeah.
So.
Well, how could that happen? I ask incredulously.
Indeed, yes. Decades of neglect.
But doesn't this? If it was city owned, the city can do what it wants. Is that what you're saying?
Well, in cases where the city says that it's an immediate threat to public safety.
Right. Okay. All right.
So.
Wow.
So, is there anything else from SHPO? Any news?
This is Jen Schofield. I just report, as you know, Chris, that our landscape documentation project is in full swing. There are several survey teams out this week doing their survey work and doing some community events, one of which will be tonight at Keeney Park. And the other piece of designation news is that the National Park Service's National Historic Landmark Committee will be meeting this fall, and the P.T. Barnum Institute Museum is on that agenda. I do have the notice letter, and I will share that with the board if you'd like to see that NHL nomination.
Is this a new nomination or a restatement of a nomination?
So the Barnum Museum Bridgeport is listed on the National Register, and an update was approved a few years ago to raise the level of significance to national.
Okay.
This nomination is to designate it as a National Historic Landmark as opposed to just being on the National Register of Historic Places.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. And for anyone who didn't know, the landscape survey that Jenny mentioned is landscapes associated with the Olmsted landscape firm, Frederick Law Olmsted and his sons. And Preservation Connecticut got a grant from the state, and we're working together with consultants to document Olmsted firm landscapes, and also write a context report outlining the connections between the Olmsteds and the Olmsted firm and Connecticut, which are extensive. And this is in the build up to the 200th anniversary of Frederick Law Olmsted's birth next year. He was born in 1822 in Hartford, where he's also. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have anything? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh my. Is it possible at a certain point to have just a little review session on exactly what the regulations have to say about either this kind of demolition issue or just in general what our legal role is? Or Jen, can you send me a memo? If it's actually written out in a pamphlet somewhere?
Yes, I can do that, and we can have State Review Board training of any kind at any point.
Mm-hmm.
We can, some state review boards do one annual session. Prior to COVID, when we were in person, if you recall, we were doing topic specific 15-minute sessions. So absolutely, we want to do that every year, and we can add that as a topic and reinstate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea.
I do. Yeah.
But in the meantime, I move to adjourn.
Second? Somebody?
Second, I second.
Okay.
John Herzan, second.
All right. I don't think a roll call's necessary. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.